Tales of Estolia. Written by Sashina Kerfman. Volume 1. The Promise of Zacharias. Part 6. Prophecy. Chapter 10. Fountain.
The longevity of Estolia can be directly attributed to the strength of the promised blessings. No Estolian man, having yielded his soul up into the keeping of his spouse, can do so without experiencing the compulsion to raise each child steeped in the teachings of Zacharias, so that they too will have the same wondrous experience in their time. Francisco Feliciano Zacarian, Capítulo 77.
Kenzie was dressed for the evening celebrations early. It was about an hour before the evening meal. She left her room and left the palace to stand by the fountain and gaze at Mount Estoliana. She frequently looked at both the cathedral and the entrance to the temple. She sat on the side of the fountain nearest the valley between the mountains. It provided her an uninterrupted view of the two holy buildings. She had been fascinated by both since she came to Estolia.
"There comes a time when you do have to make a leap of faith,"
said a firm voice behind her. She turned. It was Nico's brother Leon, the king of Estolia.
"Why is it hard for me?"
she asked him.
"My guess is that you have grown up in the absence of any guiding faith or religion. You are not comfortable yielding yourself up to deity in any form, and probably you have felt a certain level of contempt for those who have a belief based on something so ephemeral as faith."
She felt as if somehow this man, whose job description was not about matters of the spirit, understood her better than Zeke did.
If you yield yourself up to faith, it feels like you are rejecting a love and belief in science and the scientific method. It is hard to accept that there can be a deity who can influence your life.
How could some deity know her, choose her as the one for Nico?
Tell me, Kenzie, if you were to remove religion from the equation, would you be more or less tempted to marry Nico?
Her response was immediate.
More.
You would marry him if the faith was not a part of this.
Leon asserted.
It is the religion itself standing in the way. It gives promises you are not willing to believe, because you worry you will discover that they are not true. You worry you will be promised Nico is yours for eternity, only to find he has strayed, and you were a fool to believe this silly religion and the assertions within it. You do not want to believe if believing makes you a fool. You feel strongly that the promises are too clear, too specific, not nearly as vague as Christian religions you may have learned about.
You understand me better than I understand myself.
Moved by the Spirit to reassure you, help you to see a few things clearly from a new perspective. I believe there are strong forces at work here in Estolia.
He was silent for a short while.
I could take you to visit every family in Estolia. Every family. You would find a sort of universal happiness in marriage. I believe it is because the promises of deity are kept, that there is so much faith in our religion. We believe because we are given proof that there is a reason to believe.
Her eyes returned to the temple. Nico knew what his purpose in life was. What would her purpose be?
If you would marry Nico in the absence of his faith, you should marry him in its presence. I ask you, Kenzie, as sovereign of Estolia, and as Nico's brother, to exercise faith in only one thing, yourself. You are right for my brother. Have faith that you can hold him. Trust in yourself.
He pulled her into his arms and hugged her.
Save at least one dance for me tonight.
After he left, she turned her back on the temple and looked instead at the pond. Immense koi swam lazily in the water. She sat on the edge and trailed her fingers in the water, watching as one gold and red fish surfaced and tried to swallow one of her fingers. She giggled at the sensation. In front of her was the palace spread out in all its wondrous glory. Suddenly she felt carefree, as if her soul was a hot air balloon and all the ballast was jettisoned. She was not sure, not entirely, how the evening would go, but she sensed everything was coming clear to her. She was glad that the waiting was almost over. Hands crept around her waist. Kenzie knew instinctively that they belonged to Nico, and she leaned backwards against the strong bulk of his body. The memory of the erotic dreams warming her nights came back to her, as his body pressed against hers. She put her hands over his and sighed.
"It is just about time for dinner,"
he said after a couple of minutes. She nodded, and when he stepped away, she turned and looked at him. He was the most attractive man she had ever met. She remembered back, was it only a week ago? To when he proposed to her. After Mark's brutal denunciation of her, it seemed impossible to believe anyone would find her attractive. His eyes met hers, studied them, perhaps trying to decipher the message within. Whatever he saw spurred him to step closer and take her into his arms. She returned his kiss passionately, wanting to do nothing more than skip the celebration and explore everything this man had to give to her, for as long as he could. She felt the hot prod of his desire just before he pulled back, easing his body away from hers, and smiling.
"Kenzie, I would love to have you for my wife. What I do not want is for you to answer right now. Let us enjoy the festivities."